We are now entering my least favorite time of year, which I will affectionately call post-spooky season. Yeah, so I live on the East Coast in the US. We are entering the first and final 2 weeks of autumn, which is the time of year when we get to watch leaves change color and fall and expose trees for exactly what they are, which is just a group of pointy sticks. And although I'm not a big fan of fall, one of my favorite things to do around this time of year is to rewatch the miniseries called Over the Garden Wall. If you haven't seen it, the miniseries is about two brothers that get lost in an endless, magical, mystical, beautiful, lush forest during this time of year, right after Halloween. And one of the most amazing things about the series is the artwork and the backgrounds. I mean, I feel like the forests seem incredibly lush and organic and vibrant and alive and glowing and dark and mysterious and all of the wonderful things that you want a forest to be in one 11 episode miniseries. It's incredible. It's incredible just for the artwork alone, but the story itself is very moving and sweet too. I figured one way I could embrace the season this year is by honoring one of my favorite cartoons, playing one of my favorite games, and creating a nice little lot that is a replica, sort of one of the buildings from Over the Garden Wall. Today's build focuses on the old mill from Over the Garden Wall. It's featured in the first episode. We see it for about 3.2 seconds. This series, I don't think, is necessarily known for the architecture, as the main characters spend most of their time outside. That being said, I really wanted to make a build that allowed me to play around with terrain paints and... what are they called? Terrain paints... terrain tools. Yeah, I really wanted to make a build that allowed me to play with terrain paints and terrain tools. Wait, is that what they're called? I think so. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I wanted to do that and really kind of go over the top with foliage and create a garden that hopefully feels just as alive and vibrant and lush as the backgrounds from Over the Garden Wall. The old mill from Over the Garden Wall is literally 2 boxes. There's not a whole lot to the building. And also we only see it from a couple different angles, so there wasn't a whole lot to go off of. What you're probably starting to see now is something that looks pretty similar to what's in the show, maybe a little bit more embellished and a little bit more detailed, which I'm sure you're looking at the screen and rolling your eyes because, again, it's just 2 boxes with some paint on them. What I will say is that in the beginning of this build, I was really trying to be true to the show with the handful of reference images that I had, but what I realized pretty early on is that it's overly simplistic. And in The Sims 4, it kind of reads like an EA build. So later on in the build, I do revisit the exterior and look for different ways to add details and kind of make it feel a little bit more special and a little bit more like people are actually living there. And then when we go to the interior as well, it's a complete deviation from the show. So really, this is a build that's inspired by Over the Garden Wall, not necessarily a replica. One pack that ended up being really helpful for this build was the Werewolves pack, which I was not anticipating. I used the roofing from the Werewolves pack and a bunch of items later on as well, and it really helped it feel aged. It helped it feel lived in, and maybe like this was a space that was inherited through a family member and it maybe like fall into disrepair over many years of not being used. Shout out to the Werewolves pack, because I feel in some ways the applications of those items are really limited, but it really comes in clutch for things like this because I do not know that I would be able to achieve the same look and feel without it. So I'm starting to use some terrain tools here, and we'll see later on in this video that I actually end up moving to a different lot that's a little bit bigger, because the intention here is that in the show, the mill is right next to a huge waterfall, which is what propels that water wheel and ultimately makes the mill work. So I first was trying to do like a small little waterfall behind the mill that was kind of, you didn't really see it from the front, and I was hoping that I would be able to figure out a way to have water cascade over the edge of the terrain. That did not work. So later we use a different solution with some debug waterfall objects. But yeah, so we just started kind of like laying the groundwork here. The majority of this build actually is me working on and getting practice with creating really dense, lush forests. So I spent a lot of time in debug. I spent a lot of time looking and stacking and layering different types of trees and bushes and ground cover and all of that. One thing actually that was kind of difficult is that I was using a few reference images of backgrounds from over the garden wall of a particular time when everything was golden. Everything was a beautiful golden hue, and I really wanted the foliage around this mill to replicate that. So in the show, actually, this area is really dark and creepy, but I wanted this to be beautiful in a place that you actually wanted your Sims to go and retreat. It was actually very hard to find different debug objects that had a yellow sort of fall time or autumn time color variation. A lot of them are a really weird red color that I find to be really unnatural. It kind of goes more towards magenta rather than an orangey type of leaf. And you can even see it in the area around the buildable space on this lot where there are these trees that are like basically purple. And, for some kind of like fantasy build, that's great that we have that option in game, but just a really unhelpful object just in general when you're just trying to build normal lots. But yeah, the goal of this was really for me to get some practice in layering foliage. So please feel free to leave me a comment. I would love to know about how you handle doing environments like this, or how you kind of combine objects to create a more natural atmosphere in The Sims 4. When I work in environments like this, I always think of creating a slope, a mound. So let's say you put down one single tree and you have an invisible circle around it. And from the absolute highest point of the center of your circle, you want to create almost like a height gradient that slopes down to all sides of your circle. And so I start with one tree, and then a lower tree, and then a high bush, and then a lower bush, maybe a medium bush in there, high grass, and then ground cover. And then the end result is you have the center of your circle is the high point, not me praying. You have the center of your circle as your high point, and then as you go down on all sides of your circle, no matter what the side is, it all gradiates down to the same height. And so as I'm creating clusters of my highest objects, I put down all the big trees first. I think about how I'm going to slope down from that high point using a selection of complementary trees and bushes and grasses. So that's how I do it. I would be very curious if you have a different process or if you think about it in a different way, because I feel like there are so many different ways that you can go about creating natural organic environments in The Sims 4. So yeah, I would love to hear what your process is. So here we see me jump from the first lot that I was working on to the second lot. Just needing a little bit more space to accomplish the overall feeling. And I think ultimately it leads to a much more complex and interesting looking environment anyway. So I'm happy that I realized I needed to do that, but yeah. So what we're going to work on first is putting in this waterfall. So these objects here, damn, I'm going to forget. What are these from? Yes, okay, yeah. So I found this object ages ago in another creator's video. Her name is Kate Emerald. And I remembered about this waterfall, which I have not used for a very long time. And ended up having to find her original video. So anyway, this object, I learned about using it from Kate Emerald here on YouTube. This is a debug object from Island Living, and it's great because it's an actual moving waterfall. There are a couple of these. I think some come with Get Together as well, and maybe one or two other packs, but I really love the shape and animation of the waterfall from Island Living. And then to hide the fact that there's just a waterfall floating in the back there, I put a bunch of debug rocks all around the waterfall, and then the rest of the lot as well, which we'll see in a little bit. Now, here's the thing with debug rocks. I would almost say all. But I'll say most rocks that you find in the debug menu don't have collision coded into them, which just means that your Sims will walk directly through them. Obviously, this is difficult because they're rocks, so they really shouldn't be able to do that. So there are a couple ways that you can prevent your Sims from walking through debug objects. What I did here was a combo of two different things. First, which we're watching right now, is that I took actual rocks just from the regular build catalog, and I placed them all around the perimeter of the debug rocks. This is very tedious, and also if you're not careful, you can just leave like the tiniest gap that your Sims will walk through, completely negating the whole entire thing that you did. So actually the easier thing, and what I would recommend doing, is that if you have the Get Famous pack, there is a fence there, which is set tape. So the fence is set tape, but it's great because it's completely flat and it prevents your Sims from walking past it. And so you see here when I move these rocks, there is a collection of a bunch of actual like regular catalog rocks and then a whole bunch of that sort of set tape on the ground hidden below the debug objects. And this will prevent your Sims completely from walking through any of your debug objects as long as you completely cover the perimeter of the debug object. So the last thing I did here was I want this forest to feel very lively, and so I put a rabbit home, I put a little, the tree trunk that has the birds that live in it, and I also put a couple rabbits around the place too, so when you download it, I'm pretty sure they transfer with the gallery, so if you do download this, you should see the rabbits on your lot immediately, which is very cute. And then I also eventually, and actually you can see it here, I end up putting a couple different of the pond objects in as well. So we have some fish and some tadpoles and fireflies all around the place. And yeah, this is where the lot is right now. I edit those debug rocks all over the place, not just around the waterfall. We have most of our foliage in, we got mushrooms everywhere, and yeah, and I also put fences around the area too in a couple different places. But yeah, for the most part, the exterior of the build is now complete. We got our terrain paint down and everything. There may be a few more little final touches, but this is where we landed. Another big thing in Over the Garden Wall is, of course, the purpose of the old mill and the character that we meet at the old mill, who is cutting down trees all across the forest. So I did have to have a couple trees that had fallen, which I will not explain any further in case you have not seen the show and you are interested in at some point doing so. So now we're inside. And we skipped ahead a little bit here. I figured out sort of like paint swatches and things like that, and I did a little bit of work on the inside of the mill. And so first off, we're starting off with a little kitchen area. We basically have one big combined living space. Well, big is not the word. We have one combined living space on the first floor, and then I created a big platform area on the back half of the living section, which is where the bathroom and the sleeping quarters are. So we're starting off with the kitchen, and I'm using actually the cabinets and counters from the Country Kitchen kit, which I really love. And I don't use them too often because I don't build like this too often, but they're really beautiful objects. I know we all have differing opinions on kits, but if this is your style, I think it's a kit that's well worth it. They're very beautiful. And they have really nice color variations too that work well with a lot of other packs. But yeah, so we just put in a simple little kitchen there, and we're gonna work on the living space. We got to get a lot in here, so we have to get our kitchen, a place to eat, a place to rest. We need to get some hobbies all in here. You may have noticed at some point here that I tucked away a refrigerator kind of next to the front door as opposed to with the rest of the kitchen. I like the idea that, this mill was not intended to be a home. It was later converted to a home, which has kind of fallen into disrepair, but it was later converted to a home. And so the refrigerator didn't really fit anywhere. So they ended up just kind of shoving it in the corner instead. But yeah, so now we're kind of putting in the objects for the living room. We have a big, beautiful roaring fire and some furniture that maybe has seen better days, but still looks plenty comfortable, I think. And for builds like this, I really like the idea of found objects being functional objects. And so I added that crate there as a little end table. If I remember right, I'm pretty sure that's base game. I'm sure people are tired of looking at that object, tired of using that object because it's base game and it's pretty unique too. There's not a lot of objects like that. So I'm sure it looks a little tired to some people, but I think it makes a lot of sense for something like this. And I wanted to fill the kitchen with a bunch of little knickknacks and things that, again, felt functional and felt like they would be used. In a space like this, you got to make use of every little corner, every little inch of the area that you have. So then we also have a little china cabinet that's kind of like tucked next to a fireplace over there behind a lamp. And we got, the cereal box, and I eventually put some pots and pans up on the top of the cabinets. I really just didn't want to be too precious about where things were placed and more think about how you could use any little bit of space that you could find in a build like this to store your objects or stuff like that. Yeah, so our living room, our kitchen, living, and dining space are kind of all coming together now. This rug, I believe, is that from the Werewolves pack? I believe that's, I can't remember. It might not be, but I love the colors of this rug and I feel like it kind of pulled everything together. I actually, anytime I'm working on a build like this, my default is that rug and I really try not to use it. I don't know if I've uploaded any other videos where I used it yet. If I have, I'm sorry. I'm going to try and stop, but I love that rug. I think it's such a beautiful color palette. And then, yeah, so we're just kind of trying to figure out what can work in the living room. I was trying to see if I could get a coffee table in there, but it was just a little bit too cramped. But that being said, I was able to put a nice sort of like sofa table or something like that behind the couch. And I love that because I just like it's so close to the front door. So I was just thinking, as your sim is coming home, they may want to put their keys down there or set their cell phone down as they kind of take off their jacket or something like that. It seemed like a very functional place to have a table. And then, yeah, here we're going to start like hopping around a bunch and you can see in this footage sort of like how I play The Sims and how I build in The Sims. It doesn't make for a great video. What I do is I literally just scroll through all of the decorations or all of the tables or all of the whatever and place it in the area that it makes sense. I think a better video would probably be me going room by room and just decorating them without moving around too much, but my brain just does not work that way. But the living space is mostly done now. Now we're working on the very small bathroom. This looks really tight and it is really tight, but I ended up player testing it a bunch and moving things pixel by pixel to make sure the toilet and the sink could both be used. So if you are interested in downloading this, have no fear. The bathroom should work as designed. And then we are working on the sleeping area. Yes, now we're working on the sleeping area. And here, I this entire time had imagined the bed going vertically as I've originally just placed it there, and the Sims could just not get around it. So luckily, I pretty quickly thought of just using this orientation instead, and I used a couple shelves here sized up as sort of built-in side tables, and it worked perfectly. And the Sims were able to get around it with no routing issues on both sides, so that was great. And yeah, I think it actually has a much better flow than my original idea anyway. So we got our bed down, and here we are again, jumping over to the kitchen to place something. But we got our bed down, and then we also even had room for a little desk. So this is an object from the Werewolves pack, so is the mirror that's on the wall. We had room for a nice little desk here. I do place a laptop ultimately, if you want this to be a more relaxed lot, or a little bit, maybe you want to play off the grid, want to do simple living kind of vibes, I can of course remove that. But yeah, I did place a laptop down, and I was trying to squeeze in a dresser, which was a wild idea for me. But then I remembered we had these awesome suitcases. This is also one of my favorite objects that I'm pretty sure I've been overusing in these videos. But it's so cool that these suitcases function as a wardrobe. So I put the suitcases at the edge of the bed, which I really loved. And then that allowed me to fit in a bookshelf because I wasn't sure where I was going to do that. I figured I may have to just like put some books down on a surface somewhere and call it a day. But yeah, I was able to fit a bookshelf up there on the little platform for the bedroom. So that was cool. And so now we're kind of just wrapping up by going around and placing hobby items, skill building items. With something like this, I'm creating this for people to enjoy if you're interested in it. And I think it's always helpful to have a variety of skill building objects around, depending on the stories that you want to tell in the space. So I was really just hopping around doing a bunch of things. We got a chess table down, we have a woodworking table, candle making. I also added in some laundry for those of you that have the laundry pack, which I love. It also just, I love the added realism of having laundry in the game. So we do have the laundry objects around. I put a nice clothesline out there. Oh, and actually, okay, if you saw one of my other videos, recently I did an Addams Family build where I did the same thing. But if not, one of my favorite things to do is use this object from... It is in the Werewolves pack, but the better version of it is actually in the Cottage Living pack. Basically just a little pile of dirt. This is a debug object that I love to place around the base of trees, the base of objects that are outside. It almost, if you size it down, it almost looks like a mound of dust. And you can kind of just tuck it in the corner of your builds and it adds just a little, first off, it has no collision. so Sims can just walk right over it. But it adds like a little bit of detail because it has height to it. And yeah, I just think it's like such a great way to add the teeniest tiny bits of detail throughout your build. So really cool object. There's a version in the Werewolves pack. It just, for whatever reason, the texture is lower quality. And the one that's in the Cottage Living pack is a nicer quality. So, and then lastly here, we got all of our skill building objects down. I'm just going around the exterior of the lot and placing down some lighting throughout the forest area. I wanted this to feel a little bit magical. I wanted this to feel a little whimsical, but at the same time, I didn't want to go over the top because I do really like leaning into realism and creating realistic spaces in The Sims 4. So I didn't use too heavy of a hand in this, but I thought some nice little twinkling lights around would be welcome. So yeah, I mean, that's really it. We're just doing some little final touches here. One thing I will mention, I did not realize until after I uploaded this, I put a telescope in the second floor of the warehouse, and unfortunately, the telescope can't be used indoors at all. I was hoping I could get around that because the second floor of the mill area has a couple broken walls, and so that whole space has outdoor lighting because of it. So I was hoping that you would be able to use the telescope. I did do some player testing and it did not work. So I ultimately ended up, I liked the telescope aesthetically being there. If you want it to be a functional object, you will have to move the telescope from the second floor to outside instead. I'm sorry about that. Other than that, everything else on this lot is functional. It is player tested. And yeah, that's about it. I mean, that's my cozy old mill build. Almost sounds like I was going to say mildew. I don't know, maybe I should work on that name. So that is my probably first and only autumn build, at least for the foreseeable future. And also, you know, my little build in honor of Over the Garden Wall and the wonderful series that it is. I'm pretty happy how it came out. I love how compact it is. And it's also not a super expensive lot. Let me check that before I say that. How much did this lot end up costing? Look at me, caught in 4K, lying on camera. I'm pretty sure it's cheap. This uses a lot of debug objects, especially for the landscaping. That's the word that I have been forgetting this entire time. Landscaping. Oh, I can't stand myself. This is the end of the video. This entire time I've been trying to think of the word landscaping, and for whatever reason, I could not think of it. Okay. Wow, look at me lying. Okay, so it's like $70,000. Simoleons. Not a starter home. Not a starter home. Anyway, hope you like the build. If you liked this build, there's always the motherload sheet. And please feel free to like the video. I would also love to know how you feel about landscaping. If you would like to download this build, it is now available on the gallery. My name on the gallery is Patrick Creates. No spaces, no periods, exactly the same as it is here. And I believe I titled this Cozy Old Mill, so you can look for it that way as well. If you would like to see more Sims 4 builds, I upload basically every week, so think about subscribing. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. You've been here this long, you may as well come back next time. It's pretty chill here. And also let me know what you think in the comments. That's honestly been my favorite part of this whole little thing I've been doing here on YouTube so far, is getting comments from people and talking with people and hearing kind of their takes on stuff that I'm working on, and tell me about the stuff they're working on. That's all I got this week, so until next time, y'all.